I'm going to declare a quorum and call the City of Groton, Town of Groton Special Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, March 18, 2019. Let's see, who do we have to the city side? Councilor Carter, myself, Councilor Rusk, Deputy Mayor Garish, Councilor Sheffield, and that's it. Councilor Depot is excused, and Councilor Beckford is excused, but he is on his way.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Town Council Committee of the Whole meeting is called to order at 6:34 p.m. Councilors present: Granatowski, Atwater, Baumgardner, Heed, Parker, Schmidt, and Zepari. Councilor Aubry is unavailable to attend, and Councilor Franco is running late due to another commitment.
Okay. We have two items on the agenda for tonight. The first item is the Town of Groton, City of Groton Highway Operations Comparative Analysis Report, and I will turn it over to Julia Novak, who led this study.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Julia Novak, and I'm president of the Novak Consulting Group. And I'm here with me this evening is Jonathan Ingram. Jonathan is a senior associate with our firm, and he was the project manager for this engagement. What we want to do this evening is kind of remind ourselves a little bit about what the purpose of this project was that we've been working with the town and the city on over the past year. Talk about the benchmarking work that we did to conduct the comparative analysis, and then share with you our observations and recommendations about the highway function. We'd be happy to address any questions that you all have at the end of the presentation. So the city and the town have been working for decades to determine an equitable and responsible allocation of revenues from the town to the city for the purpose of maintaining the network of roads. Our task was to explore operations in both jurisdictions and look at practices in comparable communities, and then evaluate whether the appropriateness of the city and the town in their work in maintaining the highway maintenance function. Once we understood the context, then we looked at best practices for determining an appropriate methodology for allocating funds in the future. We spent some time on site, first of all, kind of understanding the context for benchmarking for the city and the town, and then we had our team come on site and conducted individual interviews from folks both from the city, from the town, in public works, in finance. We met with frontline crews. We had opportunities to tour both communities. And then we began analyzing data and looking at the benchmarking information and trying to understand what that told us. And then we've been vetting our observations and recommendations, and are pleased to share with you our final report this week. In terms of benchmarking, we identified communities in similar jurisdictions in the state of Connecticut to compare the city and the town to. And then we looked at kind of whether or not the city's functions or town's functions were fundamentally different from those other jurisdictions. So when you talk about benchmarking, there's never a perfect comparison to another community. So we look at comparisons based on size, population, density, comparisons of lane miles, road miles, and then what the operating budget was. And even though the comparisons aren't perfect, they really do allow us to glean insights into the operations. On the town side, we identified 5 communities in Connecticut that we did the benchmarking for, and on the city side, we had different challenges in finding communities comparable to the city of Groton, but we did identify 7 communities that we did some comparative analysis with. The city is very compact and it's very dense, and so identifying those jurisdictions was more challenging. But we still were able to get a basic understanding of the highway operations in these different communities and how they compare. I think in terms of our observations and recommendations, first and foremost, our benchmarking research and our field work revealed no inherent inefficiencies in either the town or the city in how they approach highway maintenance. And so that is just kind of a good level setting point, I think, to understand that both of the jurisdictions are working hard to deliver excellent services for the communities, and you're generally in line with your benchmark jurisdictions. In fact, if anything, perhaps there's an opportunity to invest more in your infrastructure. We also recognize and realize that the city and the town are quite different in terms of the jurisdictions. The city is compact, it is dense, it is much more urban. The town has some urban areas, suburban areas, and then some areas that some might call rural. And so each community's approach to highway maintenance operations needs to reflect the values of those different communities and the particular road conditions and usage that follow. When we looked at staffing in the two organizations, our review of both the structure, crew size, how they were deployed, did not present any indications that staffing levels in either communities should be reduced. I think it's going to be more important for you all to look at what opportunities you have to maintain the assets that you have of your road network going forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan now to walk you through the specific recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you all this evening. As Julia mentioned, the question of how to go about identifying a cost share methodology going forward. You can determine whether or not there's a simple benchmark that you can use, but really fundamentally for us, the best practice is to make those determinations based on the condition of infrastructure and the service level that's expected in the community. You all have a history of taking a proactive look, both at the city and the town's level, at the condition of your pavement, but that pavement management study that serves to inform work plans and your capital investment plan was last updated in 2007 and 2008. So we would recommend first and foremost that pavement study be updated to identify a new and updated baseline as to what your investment requirements are both at the city and town level. We would further recommend that those condition assessments be expanded to include ancillary transportation infrastructure, so not just pavement, but sidewalks, sign infrastructure, your related stormwater infrastructure as well. And what this does is it gives you a baseline assessment of what the condition of your infrastructure is, helps you identify as communities what the targeted investment requirements are from a capital investment perspective, and just as importantly, helps identify what are those things that your maintenance crews can complete on an annual basis to maintain or prolong the useful life of your infrastructure. So from that pavement condition assessment and the ancillary condition assessments, we've also recommended that the town and city utilize those to develop real proactive annual work plans and define preventative maintenance goals associated with targets identified in those condition assessments, and also quantifiable standards of success. One of the opportunities is to begin to develop performance metrics that identify what the cost per maintenance activity is in each community, and really to give you all the tools that you need going forward to have quick indicators and a quick snapshot that allows for that comparative analysis to take place without having to go through this study process again, right? So beginning to identify those systems to move in that direction, and also expand the use of work order systems, both in the town and city side, to start to track labor hour data associated with very specific maintenance tasks. And we're not talking about tracking hours like lawyers. What we're talking about is tracking the amount of time that crews are generally spending, so you can really start to identify what's the real cost of maintenance per maintenance unit completed. So how much does it actually cost us to maintain a lane mile of roadway in each of these jurisdictions on an annual basis? And then using that information, the data that you can collect from those sources, to create really an outcome-based performance measurement program, and those performance metrics that you all can pay attention to as elected officials and help you inform your policy decisions and your funding decisions on an annual basis. We've also recommended a number of process improvements that are specific to both the town and also to the city. One of the things that we've recommended is that the town adopt a similar practice of accounting for highway maintenance expenses that is employed at the city level, to really track indirect costs and direct labor costs, as well as overhead costs associated with maintaining the highway maintenance function, again, to help you all sort of achieve that ease of comparative analysis going forward. It's not a common thing in public works, I'll say, to track costs in that level of detail. It's a very common thing in enterprise fund operations that have to fund themselves, so waterworks or sewer operations, that kind of thing. So it's a little different, but this is a unique situation, right? The city is tasked with collecting information in that level of detail because of the funding approach. Doing so at the town level would be beneficial to the process. We've also made a recommendation that the city look at adjusting the snow and ice event treatment plan to include the application of pre-retted salt. This is just a process improvement to improve and potentially lower the cost of snow and ice removal in the community. Some environmental assessments will be required in order to make sure that it's feasible in your community, but there's an opportunity to do this as a process improvement on the city side. We've also looked at really a number of service sharing and collaboration opportunities. There are already a number of things where the town and city collaborate, but there are some opportunities to further collaborate going forward. One of the opportunities is heavy equipment sharing. The town and city in many ways perform many of the same functions with respect, just in different service areas. Being able to identify opportunities to share equipment mitigates the cost of investment in those equipment and also maximizes the utilization. The challenge with heavy equipment sharing is everybody needs that dump truck at the same time, so you have to kind of think along those lines as well and make sure that it works operationally, but there are some clear opportunities, and we've seen this work in other jurisdictions as well. There's also some service swapping opportunities. Each of the communities have developed really some specializations. The city is particularly good at doing concrete work, sidewalk related work. That's a major element of the work that they perform. The city has a paving program that they're able to manage in-house. So working with each other and doing some service sharing relationships, some service swapping may provide cost savings to the residents of both the town and the city. Each of these the book of these recommendations is really designed to start to drive you all toward a place where you're developing work plans and you're developing your conversations around budget and investment needs, around the condition of the infrastructure and what investment is required to maintain it going forward. So fundamentally, that's our our overarching best practice recommendation. And at this point, we're certainly happy to answer any questions you all may have about our work.
Anyone?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Remember to use the microphone.
Yeah, I know. One of those slides just says each community's approach to staffing structure and service delivery should reflect the particular conditions of those communities. Could you explain that? Are you talking about the road condition, or are you talking about the particular community itself?
So really a little bit of both. So, fundamentally, you want to design a public works function, a highway maintenance function, to be able to service the workload that's required based on the condition of the infrastructure. Okay. So that's kind of the first piece. But the other piece is service expectation. So what does the community expect in terms of how their roads are maintained, how the sidewalks are maintained? That's a really important conversation, and you all as elected officials are sort of the conduit to start to filter those service level expectations into funding and allocation decisions.
Okay, and the reason I say that, personally speaking, I grew up in Groton, and I grew up in a section of Groton that I don't know then or now that it's the conditions of the roads. It's I don't think that the area of the town is looked at as an importance as certain sections of town. So for instance, say like Midway Oval or like Atlanta Court or something like that in the town of Groton, right? If the roads needed work done, but say like Pearl Street and Mystic needed roads done as well, but we only had a certain amount of funds, what section would get done?
Yeah, so ultimately you want your condition assessment to be completed based solely on the engineering standards in terms of what's the condition, where do you perform maintenance, where do you perform capital investment, with the goal of maximizing the useful life of that infrastructure, right? The question of how you all decide where to invest those resources, that's a policy conversation,
The other thing that I would just add is the other piece that would go into that decision is the actual use of the infrastructure. It's going to differ in different parts of town. It's one of the fundamental differences actually between the city and the town is the higher traffic counts. And so as you look to where to invest, certainly you want to capture and maintain the infrastructure before it fails, so you don't have to go through the expense of completely rebuilding it. And at the same time, you're going to be kind of triaging things based on the condition and the road counts of traffic counts in the area as well. So all those will go into the decisions that your engineers would bring forward of which roads this year need to get maintained.
So who holds? I mean, I guess that's not. I guess that's a different discussion. I guess, you know. I just don't know who would. I don't know if I'm saying it right, because I mean I've known firsthand that I've seen in the past that there's, you know, and I'm just saying like the Quonic Bridge area, right, in Groton. There's water mains that have been broken, and you know, I see, like, you know, I don't want to say patch jobs done, but that's pretty much what it is, patch jobs, you know. I've never seen a full-out investment of roads get done in that area of town, as opposed to, say, like a higher end part of town, you know.
So the equity lens that you're talking about, you know, are we equitably distributing funds, would be something that I'm certain your town manager would be interested in knowing perspectives about, and so a conversation for the town council to have as well, and would be informed by data that your engineering department could provide you on, you know, what has and hasn't been done, because sometimes we think we know what's been done and we don't actually know, and so kind of having a whole conversation around that could be helpful, but it certainly would be outside of the work that we've done here for you all this evening.
Town manager?
Just to say, since I've been here, the town has used that pavement condition study to program the roads. However, it is out of date, though, so we're extrapolating from where it is. So unless something, that's pretty much where we go with. The only thing that would alter it is, let's say, a utility company was doing some work on a particular road, and that was a little bit further in our program to do. Well, while they're there and doing things, we might do something differently at that time. But for the most part, we do use the pavement conditions, at least since I've been here. Right.
And like you said, it's just maybe between the wording of, you know, of what it says, you know, should reflect the particular condition of those communities. So the wording, and just what I've seen, you know, in the past 37 years of life, I guess. You know, I see a lot of work done with you know, and obviously the one section that I'm talking about, it's a tourist attraction type area, you know. So I'm just curious of how that. But you answered the question.
Right,
you know.
and they're talking more between city and town, not within the town. For the rest of the parts, they're not. I don't think touching on that. The city and town have kind of different standards. City probably spends a little more per mile, but appropriately. They probably have a little bit higher standard level. We might be a little too low from what I've seen in the full study for what we're spending.
I'm not talking about.
I'm
not talking about the city. I was talking about the town. But since it's a joint meeting,
right,
and
right.
From the town,
But they're not looking into the town part, right, or into the rest of the town.
Yes, sir.
Councilor Supremo?
I'm just curious, thank you. I'm probably exposing my ignorance, but you commented that we should decrease the use of sand in favor of using pre-wetted salt. Now, my impression is that salt, pre-wetted or not, is intended to melt ice, but sand is used to increase traction where we haven't succeeded in melting ice. Will the pre-wetted salt replace that traction function?
It won't fully, it would not fully replace it, but melting the ice, making,
Sure.
basically, it's a pre-application to ensure that the ice melts so that you don't run into the friction challenge in the first place. The other benefit of it is sand is a real challenge with respect to stormwater infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that's really a major area of potential investment need going forward with MS4 requirements and stormwater requirements going forward.
I'm just wondering if we are risking losing some aspect of safety for the drivers on the road by not sanding the roads as well as salting them.
We're not saying not to sand them. We're not saying to completely eliminate sand. Ultimately, we wouldn't take that authority. We wouldn't, at this pulpit, tell your public works director how they should or should not determine what the appropriate course is for each event.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Heath?
To follow up on that, just out of curiosity, what's the environmental concern with pre-wetted sand?
In terms of storing the brine, there have been some conversations already, and the city is sort of engaged in conversations about what it means to store the brine and how to do that properly. So I was just leaving a little wiggle room for them to suss that out with the state, make sure that's clear. So,
would you get that salt from somewhere else? Like right now, I know we get it from New London. Is that right?
Well, you still get the salt. There's a brine, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a brine tank that's on the back that wets the salt as it's starting to come out. So it's an additional function that sprays onto the salt that we normally have. It's not a different product. So you're spraying the brine onto the salt so that you lower the temperature for freezing.
Okay, understood. Then the second question is, and then I'm done. You had mentioned that the city has a specialty basically with sidewalks and, you know, things like that. How would you suggest the city and the town work to use that service in the town? And also, what are the services the town might do that could be subcontracted to the city?
Really, from the town's perspective, the paving function, there's a limited period of time where they can perform the pavement work. So determining some service sharing opportunities in that period in the summertime would really be the best immediate opportunity. But we certainly wouldn't limit it to those opportunities as well. So you could look at anything from sign shop kind of things to, you know, a lot of opportunities there with respect to service sharing.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Garris, but we'll need to get you to a new.
I'll just stand up and speak.
I can
be heard.
pull the mic out.
On the salt thing, I know the state does that consistently, but I think they mostly do it on bridges where it freezes over quickly, and we don't really have a lot of bridges in the city. And just to comment on Council Heed, on the paving in the city, if I'm correct, and Highway Director can correct me if I'm wrong, we contract that out. Am I correct? And I'm not sure that the town does. And I think that we're a little bit frugal in doing that. So that's my comment on that.
Okay, thank you.
Hold on, Councilor Bumgarner, you had your hand up next.
Now, I know that the city,
Hold on. John, can you let
Sure.
him?
Another region.
I don't
I think
have
we need
much
that
more
one.
than that. Can you let Councilor Bumgarner use this microphone? I want to be able to pick this up for everyone so that the audience, not just the audience in here, but the audience watching television can pick it up, please.
hello, television. The question was how much the city highway department deferred from the town highway department in terms of responsibilities and roles. I know you touched on that a little bit, but could you, you know, I know, for example, in the city, for example, you know, the public works as a whole, you know, you have certainly a sanitation division and whatnot. So, are there any responsibilities that, say, fall in the division for, say, sanitation that it would, say, in the highway operations or out of town?
So, can everyone hear me okay? Is this on?
You have a red light. If you have a red light, you should be on.
What a waste.
So, I took notes.
Now it's on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So for the benefit of the crowd, I'm going to try to paraphrase your question, if that's okay, and then I'll answer. So the question, I believe, was as we looked at both the town and city operations, were there any fundamental differences between the services delivered at the town level versus the city level? Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we were tasked with really looking specifically at the highway maintenance function. So we did not look at in sanitation in detail. We did not look in the utility functions, for example. But within the highway services function, the town and city are largely performing the same tasks that you would expect of a highway maintenance function. There's some variation in terms of areas of focus. You know, like I said, the city does a lot of sidewalk-related work. The town has a paving program, but both the city still performs paving work, right, and the town still performs sidewalk work, just to different levels of frequency.
So because of the study's limit and scope, based on the results you got back, especially, you know, in realizing that there could be some savings or efficiencies between highway operations, in your eye, do you think there could be even more efficiencies or other areas of collaboration moving forward in, say, some of the other divisions?
So the question, could there be, based on our assessment, could there be other opportunities for collaboration in other areas? Really, I really couldn't speak to that. That we wouldn't want to presuppose that without going in and looking at each of those functions. So we wouldn't make that conclusion at this point.
Okay, Councilor Rusk?
Thank you for the study, but I have not seen a pavement study before, so could you tell me what we should expect to learn from a new pavement study?
So you should expect a pavement study to define, there's a thing called a pavement condition inventory, and it's a pavement condition index, and it's a standard measurement of 0 to 100 that grades the condition of your transportation infrastructure. So think of it as red, think of it as green, yellow, red, essentially. What you can expect from the pavement study is to define what your current rating is by section of transportation infrastructure. You can expect that pavement study to define for you the amount of investment required to bring your pavement condition index, to bring your rating up for each of those sections. So if you want to move this section from red to green, this is what it costs. If you want to move it from red to yellow, this is what it costs, okay? You should also expect that pavement condition assessment, a good one, to not only tell you what your capital budget needs are, so what you should bond for in terms of contracting for major road reconstruction, but you should expect it to provide guidance in terms of what sort of maintenance activities should your work crews be performing, and where should they be performing it to maximize the useful life of your transportation infrastructure.
Thank you. And one more question. You talked about heavy equipment sharing. How have other communities done that? In that one community obviously has to own the equipment. Who performs maintenance on the equipment? How does that work?
Yeah, so one community would, there are a number of different models. Usually one community will own it. There will be typically a training program to make sure that the communities that have access to use it, sometimes there's a rental fee, so sometimes it's a small revenue generating, and or sometimes there's a service sharing where one community will own the backhoes and the other will own the skid steers. So there's a few different models out there. But typically one community is going to own it from insurance purposes, and you just need to make sure that those operators in the other communities are trained to effectively use it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm sorry. Mayor Granatowski.
Thank you for the report. Going back to what Councilor Heed had broached as far as the pre-wedding of, I'm sorry. Thank you. Going back to the concept of the salting and the pre-wedding of it, I thought I saw something in the full report about the environmental impact, and it would actually be less than using the dry sand, if you will.
Correct.
Could you just explain that, please?
But yeah, so that's primarily related to the stormwater impact. So sand ultimately rolls into your stormwater infrastructure. There are increasingly strict regulations related to stormwater management.
No, I thought it had addressed the salt in and of itself as the loose salt, the granular salt. I thought it said it went off the road more and had more of an impact than if you wet it and it stays specifically on the pavement.
Oh, correct. Yeah. So it basically limits the runoff essentially. That's the value of it. So.
Any other comments? Okay, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Julia, thank you. Jonathan, thank you. All right. The next item on the agenda is the tax increment financing. That will be a joint presentation with John Ryder and Dennis Godere.
Mr. Burt?
Yes.
This is the item where, excuse me.
Sorry.
All right, hold on. Point of order, everybody. All right, go ahead. Mayor.
This is the item where you're looking for us to set a public hearing date, correct?
That's my understanding. Is that right, John?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Okay, so, would someone like to read the motion? It's on page 4. This is 2019-201 tax increment financing.
So I'll make a motion to make a determination that the TIF. We'll make a motion to make a determination that the TIF master plan satisfies the requirements of the Connecticut General Statutes as specified in Chapter 105B, tax increment districts, and further to refer the draft City and Town of Groton Joint Tax Increment Financing (TIF) District Master Plan as written to the Planning and Zoning. Scratch that second planning. Commission and schedule a public hearing for the master plan on September 3rd, 2019. I so move.
Second. Moved by Heed and seconded by Schmidt. Thank you. Mr. Reiner.
Good evening.
Mr. Mayor.
Hold on. Do you guys have a time or just that date?
Hold on. We just have the date.
Because
Do you need
we
a time?
well, we're going to, in the meeting following this, ours has a date and a time. I could get rid of the time and just list the date.
We're normally
But-
6:30, correct, Mr. Burton? For the public hearings?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll go 6:30. Okay.
I don't know if you need to do anything to process this correctly, or?
No, well, when we have our follow-on meeting, this is, our mayor and council meeting is next, and then that'll be our motion. Councilor Atwater.
Place for the meeting, the hearing?
It'd be at our regular September 3rd council meeting, I believe, though it would be a joint public hearing.
So that'll be at the town.
Town council meeting at the annex.
Okay, anything else on that? All right. John, go ahead.
All right, good. Thank you. Good evening. John Reiner, Director of Planning and Development for the Town of Groton. Good evening, members of the councils, plural. So Dennis and I are going to tag team tonight talking about tax increment financing. And, you know, first off, just want to thank all of you for working with us on this. It's been a pleasure working with Dennis and his team and others across the city and the town on this, and I think it's been very successful thus far. So a quick overview of TIF and some of the other components of it. We'll try not to spend too much time on this. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about tax increment financing in the past. So what is tax increment financing? Really the short is it's an economic development tool. It's something that we utilize to help incentivize development that wouldn't normally happen without the tax increment financing. It is not a new tax. I try to say this every time because although it talks about tax increment financing, sometimes people still get confused that this is going to be a new tax or a new surcharge. It is not. It's something that allows us to negotiate with developers to get development that normally wouldn't happen. The types of development that we want, that we're all looking for. Certain process in the state of Connecticut of how we follow it. It used to be TIFs had to be approved by the state. Now it's done at the local level. Town councils, city councils, referrals to planning and zoning commissions, TIF advisory committees are involved. A public hearing is set. The last meeting we had at the town council was, why is that public hearing set so far in advance? The state law requires that from the time the council refers it to the planning or planning and zoning commission, the public hearing shall be no sooner than 90 days after that. So that's why we have a long lead time for our planning and zoning commissions to go through that document. Afterwards, after the PZC reviews, it comes back, the council has that public hearing. You can then, if there are any suggested changes that come up through the planning and zoning review, at the public hearing, we can make those, and then it's up to the councils to adopt. The town and the city have both worked on TIF policies. We've adopted those. That's all been back in 2018. Those laid out the format and the guidelines for how all of our TIF districts will be completed in the future. The draft city and town joint master plan, Dennis is going to jump into this one a little bit. But again, some of the things, you know, we keep talking about the process of this because it is a little convoluted. This has to be adopted. It's back, okay. I think batteries might be on their way out, so maybe after tonight we'll change the batteries. Has to be adopted by both the town and the city council. The tax increments captured, same percentages. The way that the master plan is set up is it's mirroring both what happens within the city happens in the town and vice versa. The city could do a TIF district without the town and vice versa, but it really wouldn't make any sense for us to be going off on our own on these. I think in the spirit of cooperation, we want to see how this moves forward, and the projects have to benefit the TIF district or the area right around the TIF district. General components of the master plan, the financial plan, setting the boundaries, the maximum amount of debt that we can take on, the percentages of how much money goes towards the TIF and how much goes to the general fund, a 50-50 split there. All of these are components within the TIF district master plan. At this point, I'm going to hand things off to Dennis, talking about the boundaries and what they're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, John. Dennis Godera, the city planner for the city of Groton. So the TIF district, as it's represented on the map here, you can see it's outlined in the bold black boundary. It's roughly 118 acres. It's long and linear, as you can see. It primarily encompasses the Five Corners district, which is shown in blue at the bottom of the map. There's the white waterfront business residence district, which is Thames Street, and I highlight those two because they're two areas that have been identified for really prioritizing redevelopment and reinvestment within the city. And then the areas in red are the general commercial districts, which are vital in supporting both of those mixed-use districts, which I will mention are village districts under general statutes, which are special types of district where we can promote and regulate actual design of architecture and site design. So they're rather unique. And it also does encompass, down at the lower right-hand corner, the Colonel Leonard School by the town, and the Sacred Heart Church, which is also a very large parcel of land, unknown as to the disposition of that, but taking things long term. Okay. We got this taken care of for tomorrow night. There we go. Within the master plan booklet that was passed out, there's a summary of the purpose and need, if you will, and the vision, and it lays out some of the projects that would be funded under TIF as well. But essentially, we envision the entire TIF district as being a vibrant mixed-use village area that has residential, likely more on the second floor, commercial, vibrant spaces down below, and vibrant public spaces as well at the street level. Our goal of the TIF district certainly is to promote and see the tax base grow and to be able to build upon that tax increase to fund other improvements within the district, such as infrastructure, promoting housing, workforce development, in public spaces. And then all being done to certainly capitalize upon some of our major employers that are nearby, but may not necessarily be in the district. The plan itself, some of these go back to the policy that might be familiar to you. Looking to capture 50% of the increment. So 50% would go into the district fund, the remaining 50% to the general fund, but there's the flexibility to allow that to be moved around on a case-by-case basis. The district would be in place for 30 years, and then utilizing credit enhancement agreements as the preferred way to promote private investment. There's other mechanisms, but the CEA agreement is the preferred basis of this. And also within the master plan, there's projected revenue growth using two scenarios of 1% and 2% per year. And you can look at the tables at a later date to see what would be the projected realized increases. The projects that are being identified, I believe it's similar as the towns, were listed and described very generically, and that was done for a purpose. We don't have a full master plan per se of the TIF district. We don't know the exact type of projects and how much each of those projects are going to cost. So we've identified and categorized them by topic. Some of them would be streetscapes, some of them might be infrastructure such as utilities or stormwater improvements. It might be a facade improvement program to help businesses or incentivize businesses to upgrade their properties. In our case, along Thames Street, promoting the water-dependent uses and also public access to the waterfront. Other various business programs to support business retention and expand the employment base. Once projects are identified, the full scope of those projects will be identified, the cost of those projects would be identified, and then in order to invest in that specific project or projects, it must come back to both councils, the city council and the town council, for approval before those funds can be expended. I just want to make sure that that was noted, because it is the joint master plan. And so we're running sort of in a parallel adoption process, keeping the town's efforts slightly ahead of what's happening in the city. We're building everything upon what's been the foundation of the policy and the master plan that was developed in the town for use here in the city. Per the policy, the city's advisory committee and economic development commission, as well as the towns, has I'll say endorsed the plan to refer it to get to this point, and now you're moving it along to both of the planning commissions, both in the town as well as in the city as well, and then we'll be moving forward to the public hearing in September. And that's, I believe, all we have. Thank you.
Okay, hold it up because the receiver's at the bottom. So if you hold it at the bottom, it'll crackle. Mayor or councils, do you have any questions for John or Dennis?
Councilor Perry.
We've heard the presentation for the TIF project before, and I'm personally very enthusiastic for it. I'm concerned about, first of all, I'm enthusiastically in favor of it, because the plan is that you would assess, there would be no decrease in tax from any property that's placed into TIF. At the very least, the town would receive the same taxes they received before a TIF agreement. And that the enhancement, the tax increment enhancement for the developer would come from the increase in value that they produce and not being responsible for paying the full tax burden. I'm also under the impression that they would have to pay half of the tax burden of their increased increment for the most part. Am I correct?
Are you referring to the CEA agreement?
Yes.
Yeah, the 50% threshold, or I'll call it threshold, is what has been identified as the basis for negotiating. I think there's a wiggle room in there to go one way or the other. But.
So then the other 50%, the taxes that you would collect would be 50% on the increment, and that would go into the TIF district, and half of it would go to the town general fund. Is that correct?
Well, so the way that, so this is John speaking. So the way that it'll happen is someone will still pay 100% of the taxes. So up front, they pay the taxes first.
Yeah.
Then we would reimburse them back up to 50% for a certain period of time, depending on the negotiated credit enhancement agreement. Sure. The other 50% would go into the general fund.
Sure.
That's of the increment. The total base value of their taxes would still be going to the general fund. Sure. The only thing that could have an impact on that is if assessments change, if someone demolishes a building and then doesn't do anything, things along those lines. But otherwise, the constant will always be what they're assessed at, today, and how that changes over time.
According to the state law, we're allowed to give them 100% of the increment.
Correct.
But we're not going to do that.
There may be allowed to negotiate up to 100%. But the way our policy, in both for the city and the town policy, speaks is that 50% is our preferred. But again, when a developer comes in, they have to negotiate with us. They have to show us the books. They have to show us why they need 50% versus 25%. Or it might be, again, 50% or more for a certain period of time, depending on what it is that they're looking to finance and the cost of that.
I understand that. There's one other thing I was concerned about, and that is the possibility of bonding. And I understand we may have to bond to improve infrastructure in those districts so that it can support the various projects that are going in there. But the bonding would be income-oriented? It would be paid back by income from the TIF? Or would it be a bond that the town would have to pay back out of its taxes?
So the way that the policy reads, again, both city and town and the master plans, is that credit enhancement agreements are the preferred methodology. Could we bond? Yes, but it's not our preferred methodology. It's things that we've spoken about with our bond counsel. If we were going to go out on that limb and do bonding within TIF districts, it would be reimbursed by, I mean, again, the councils can set how that would be reimbursed, but most likely we would see that happen from the future TIF revenues.
Okay, and the thing I'm concerned about is if we bond and the project does not materialize as we expect, is the town then bound to pay off that bond?
It could be, and that's why we're saying we are not preferring to use a bonding for any of these improvements.
It's just a concern. It does have a downside that poses a little risk. But I think the way you're proposing it and the way you manage it, you will minimize those risks, and the potential upside is fantastic.
Correct.
So I'm still in favor of going ahead with the project.
Okay, anyone else?
Councilor Heed.
Councilor Heed.
Okay, so the question that we often get, or the question before I was elected that I would often ask is, you give a tax abatement to a company that's already started construction on something, or, you know, what are the metrics that we use to determine if the TIF or whatever tool that we're using is actually effective or could be better? Like, after each one, do we go back and analyze it, and how do you talk about it to the public?
So right now, I don't want to get too much into our other tax incentive programs, but we're doing just that now. We're creating policies. So a couple of years ago, we updated the policy for the town's Economic Development Assistance Fund. Right now, working with the town manager, the finance director, tax assessor, as well as economic development from our office, are writing rules and procedures for our tax stabilization agreements and how we analyze, as well as not just giving things out. Some of that is in relation to how will we, in the future, deal with the enterprise zone. As far as TIF goes, there are some criteria within the master plan of what people have to meet in order to be eligible for TIF. The state law requires that at least once every 10 years we revisit the TIF master plan to look at the metrics and things that were happening, and annually we have to report back to the councils on what we're getting from TIF, the revenues, etc. So it's something we'll be looking at constantly.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilor Atwater?
Just a minor question, but if it's 90 days out, why are we waiting until September?
From the time that the town council meeting meets, the referral gets to the planning commission, and looking at just the joining up of calendars, it could have been maybe in the middle to the end of August, schedule, summers. Logistically, it worked better. Maybe that's the shortest answer.
Councilor Varga?
So I saw the map with all the zoning and the different colors. I'm not really sure exactly what they are. But you've reviewed all of these areas to see if they are brought to the best utilization of those areas? for zoning?
Yeah, a little history on the boundary. Thank you. Batteries are working. Little history of the boundaries. So I started here in July, into July. The boundaries were already in draft form, had been reviewed with the City Council, Planning and Zoning Commission, Economic Development Commission. At the time, there was 2 TIF districts proposed, one just around the Five Corners area, one just along Thames Street, and there was a void here, and then there was an extension further down of just residential property. We looked at it and talked with our consultants. We decided to pull this up because it's zoned residential. So there's really not a lot of business uses to really see an increment, substantial increment change in the tax revenue. So why take the tax or the percentage of the taxes here, because you can only have 10% or less of the entire town under all your aggregate districts. So we took that out. We added in this extension here to connect the two, and then just seemed to make sense just to be one. There's common goals. They're both underutilized areas. They're in need of reinvestment. So as we talked about it, we felt that it made the most sense, especially for Thames Street, which is a very targeted area at this point.
And that also eliminated the enterprise zone, which is where Electric Boat is, right? Because you can't use both incentive programs. You can only use one or the other. So we wanted to ensure that we did not have any part of the Electric Boat enterprise zone in our TIF district.
The enterprise zone is slightly in it. It goes up to Pequannock Road. And there might be some properties on the other side, but it did take a substantial amount out, as to your point, yes.
Can you explain just what the colors are for?
Yep, so the colors are there's different zoning districts, so the yellows are different densities of residential. The blue is the Five Corners district, which is a mixed-use village district. The purple, which is not inside the TIF district, is our industrial technology zone, but this is all Electric Boat. The reds are general commercial, and the white here is the waterfront business residence, which is another mixed-use village district.
So just really quick, so Colonel Ledgerd is considered, the school property is considered residential?
It's in a residential zone, yes.
Just remember what we worked with the Groton Heights School. Similar to that, if the city needs to work with the town and the developer to look at zoning issues, we're ready to do that.
Yeah,
Great.
There's the adaptive reuse regulation in the city that would allow for previous facilities such as the Colonel Ledgerd School or Groton Heights to use that regulation regardless of the zoning district you're in, and it allows for different uses, more flexibility.
Anyone else? Well, hold on a second. Anyone else before councilors appearing? Is there any first-time speakers? Okay, Councilor Sapiri.
Looking at the map, it looks to be a map of the city of Groton, not the town of Groton. Now,
That's correct.
Now, the areas that are outlined, is that 10% of the city of Groton, or is it more than 10% of the city of Groton?
The 10% is the actual entire town, which would embody the city as well. What you're looking at here is, I think, roughly 1% of the entire tax base of the town and city combined.
How does it compare to the city?
Actually, we haven't run that as numbers because it's not what had been applicable under the law.
Yeah, we've worked with both the town attorneys and experts on tax increment financing. Because the city is not a municipality, the 10% relates to the municipality. So when we look at the total percentage, Dennis had mentioned that 10%, the combined Route 1 district that we're working on within the town and the Five Corners Thames district in the city and in the town, it's less than 4% of the total tax base between both districts for the town of Groton as a whole. Okay. One other point I just wanted to make when we were talking about the zoning and the planning. So a TIF district master plan, I wish they came up with a better term than master plan, because when we talk about master plans, we're thinking about a planning master plan. This is a financial master plan. The district defines the boundaries of the district of where this financing option can be used, versus a planning master plan, which Dennis and his staff are working on with a consultant for a good chunk of this area right now.
Any other questions or comments? Okay,
So, seeing no further discussion, the town council needs to vote on 2019-201 tax increment financing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So moved unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
so thank you. There is no executive session, and with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.